Hello, this is Jalen from D. Publishing, and today we're proud to present the author of Boy in the Treetops, Dr. Samuel Newsome. How are you doing today?
I am doing fine today, and you can call me Sam.
Okay. So before we begin, would you like to give us a general overview of your new release?
Okay, this is the name of the book, as you know, is Boy in the Treetops. I wanted to write something that had a little bit more appeal to a little bit younger audience. So this book has a lot of things that I thought would appeal to that audience, including ghosts and pirates and buried treasure and family situations and con men and a lot of things that would get more attention than perhaps some of my previous offerings.
Well, it definitely sounds like a great adventure. Would you mind sharing with us some of the historical context?
Sure. To achieve a spirit or a ghost, we wanted a little background. And we started in 1812 in the low country of South Carolina on a plantation. And the person of interest in this is an 11-year-old enslaved child. He becomes a houseboy to the plantation because he's the smallest one of the children of this mother, and he was just felt to be too weak to sustain himself very long if he was working in the rice plantation fields. He becomes a houseboy, which is sort of a figure which we call the whistler. His job is to carry the food from the kitchen. The kitchens were apart from the main house, to the main house for the family so that their food would be fresh and warm. And as he carries the food to the house, he has to whistle so that they know it's coming and so that he won't be tempted to sample the food as it goes by. This story I had heard at the Carter plantation near Jamestown, Virginia, 30 or 40 years ago, and it kind of stuck with me. And so I transplanted that to the low country of South Carolina. He has a relationship with one of the master's pets, which is a parrot. And when the parrot becomes a fugitive from the master, they befriend each other. And at some point, they run away from the plantation. He winds up being a cabin boy on a privateer ship. They have some adventures with that, and eventually he meets an end, which makes him a spirit or a ghost. Then we transition to the current Outer Banks of North Carolina, where a family has been displaced economically from their home in Raleigh, where they were part of a factory unit. The factory got moved to China, so the father moved back to the ancestral home on the Outer Banks. And they feel very displaced there at first, but they gradually become accustomed to the area, and their small son of 4 years old begins playing with a new playmate, which the family believes is an imaginary friend. And it goes from there.
Well, that sounds really great. So when did you first realize that you wanted to be an author?
Well, I am a family physician by trade. And as a family physician, you hear a lot of stories of your patients as they come through. And of course, you don't want to use those in any personal way in a story, but it does give you meat and fodder to put into stories. And things sort of start giving you the itch. For me, my first book was centered around a local TV station. And I get up early to go to the hospital in the mornings, generally before 6. I hear the news forecast, hear the news, and then I hear it again sometimes during the day. When I get home at 8 or 9, maybe before 11 o'clock, I hear it again. And frequently it's the same forecast. It's the same forecast or the same news. And so after a while, you think, is there something better for this? And I began seeing people who have hidden talents in my office. And I was thinking, what if we had a child who has grown into adulthood with the diagnosis of the autism spectrum? And he began to develop talents from watching some of these news items and could actually do as good as some of the news people. From there, we went on to develop a story about Jackie. Jackie is the name of my first novel. So I think just by reading a lot, listening to people, having a curiosity for the age-old question of what if? You know, you see something happen and you say, what if this happened or something else happened? And that gives you an idea for a story. And it sort of rolls on from there.
Yes, what if is definitely a big deal with creative writing for sure. So, what gave you the idea for Boy in the Treetops?
Boy in the Treetops. The current economy is one where people have thought they had their whole future laid out for them. The father in my story is achieved a college degree, was working very well in a textile factory in the Raleigh area, was climbing up the management ladder, and then his company was sold and moved to China. He was given the option of staying on with the company until he could train his replacement, who would be in China getting half the salary that he was. He felt like he couldn't do that. And so they decided to go to what they just called their Plan B, which was to move back to the ancestral home on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. His name is Triplett. There are a lot of triplets, the name Triplett, on the Outer Banks of North Carolina in this area. And he finds when they move back to the ancestral home that it is almost inhabitable because his grandfather had died years before, left the home unattended, and it was not much more than a shack. But when the driveway of their home, it's people milling all about. All are busy doing things, and they're helping this family come back to their ancestral home. Kelsey, a 9-year-old, and JJ, a 4-year-old. JJ soon starts playing, finds a playmate around, and nobody can see him. The parents remember that when the older children were their age, yes, but sooner or later they come to the idea that he may be more than just an imaginary friend. And we go on from there with the story.
Well, that's really cool. I think that for residents of North Carolina and the Outer Banks area, the book will be especially interesting as they recognize places and different names and things like that. So what was your greatest challenge in writing your book, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Greatest challenge. I'm not sure if I actually had any great challenges. I sort of let the story flow as it would. We did a fair amount of research, I guess. It was more fun than research for me. We toured several plantations on the Outer Banks, on the low country of South Carolina, including the Georgetown area, the Gula Museum in Georgetown, Brook Green Gardens, which is now a sculpture garden, but it had 4 rice plantations on it at one time, and they give a tour about the culture of the rice plantations, how hard the work was. And it was not only instructional, but it was a good deal of fun looking at these different places. In my practice as a family doctor, I have taken care of people in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And we learned about one in the area called Snug Harbor. The first Snug Harbor was built in the New York area. It was built exclusively for retired merchant Marines back in a time when there was very little in the way of communication. The highway system was not developed, and people who were merchant mariners had no family by and large. And so when they retired, they had to have a place to go. So on Staten Island, they had a place called Snug Harbor, a sort of a nursing home, retirement home. In fact, Alexander Hamilton helped do the deed for the first one. Later on in the 1970s, they built a branch in Sea Level, North Carolina, which is fairly close to the Morehead City area. And I toured that one at one time. It's a very nice nursing home. Was well managed, and everybody seemed very friendly, not only the staff, but the residents as well. One thing is that there are not that many retired merchant mariners there anymore, because with telephones and transportation and air travel, most of the merchant mariners have families when they retire. And so it's been opened up to the public. Unfortunately, some of my fiction came true, because in my book, that nursing home where the father in the story becomes employed, in my book, it became victim to a hurricane. About a year after I finished the book, Snug Harbor also became a victim to a hurricane. They almost had finished reconstructing it when Hurricane Dorian came by. And it has not been refinished since then, and I don't think it's going to be. It may be rebuilt at a different location, however. So we have dealings in my book with the staff, the administration of the home. Some of the retired merchant mariners are very colorful. One of them turns out to be a con man in the story, who gets involved not only with the older of the Triplett children, and the plot goes from there.
Well, that is really interesting. So what do you think the best thing about being an author is?
The best thing is coming up with the story and following the trail of where you're going with this. And there's no real right or wrong way, because you're the captain of the ship. You're writing the story. It can go wherever you want it to. So I really enjoy that part. And when you get into it, it almost takes a life of its own. When I look at this family that I've created, I think of them almost as family. And that can be sort of special in a way.
Yeah, it definitely is. Writing is a really strong creative freedom, and it's like you can bring things to life in like your own way.
That's exactly true.
So how long did it take to write your book?
That is a good question, because my writing comes in sessions where I may write. I may start. I was still practicing. I'm mostly retired at the moment, but when I was writing this book, I was still practicing, and I would perhaps start at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, sit down and start writing, and look up, and the clock would say 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And I would wonder where the time went. Then after a while, if I would get stuck, after a few days, if I would get stuck, I might set it aside and come back to it later. So overall, I was working on this project for the better part of a year, though I can't say that I was writing every day during that time. I had definitely had spells when I wasn't doing anything with the book other than thinking about it in my back of my head, having ideas come to me and thinking, well, that would be good. I should put that back in there. So I would say probably the better part of a year, but not consistently.
Yeah, I think it's important to take your time and really work on the book and go through phases where you just take a break on the actual structural writing and just explore different ideas and things like that. What advice would you give to inspiring authors or aspiring authors? I apologize.
Well, there are successful authors out there who make wonderful livings, a wonderful living with their imagination and their words. Most of us are not among them. So write because you want to. When you become accomplished and have an audience, you can start thinking about a livelihood. But until then, write because you want to, not because you want to make a living, make an income out of the area. So write because you enjoy it. And read other people, read a lot of different authors. Some of them you'll find that you could never do and would never want to. Others, you may find somebody that you would like to copy their form, copy some of their methods that they use, and that's perfectly okay. But read, write because you enjoy it, because you have a curiosity, but not necessarily as a vocation until you become very accomplished.
Yeah, I think it's important with any art form to really focus on enjoying it and writing for you, because once you start writing for other people or trends or things like that, something gets lost in the writing. So I think that's very important.
True.
How did it feel to hold the finished product of Boy in the Treetops in your hands for the first time?
That is a very good feeling. The finished book never seems to be quite the product that you think it is when you're looking at it in a binder of 8.5 by 11 paper. You look at the book, and with this one, I had probably rewritten sections a dozen times or more. I read it and many times, and when I looked at it, it really is a good feeling to have a finished product there. However, there's always a however in life. However, I was reading it to my 7-year-old grandson, and I thought he enjoyed listening to it, but I still find places where, I could have said that a little bit better. and I found a misspelled word, and it fretted over it for a week that, well, there's a misspelled word there in the finished product. And so it's good, it's joyful, it's to have a product out there. But you always feel like perhaps you could have done a little bit better. I think that probably every author sees that to some extent.
Yeah, I definitely think so. An artist is their worst critic, in my opinion. And as you spend more years writing, you'll learn new techniques and develop new books, and you'll think, well, what if I go back and change that one? But I think it's also important to know that that is your art, and it's worth preserving, I think. Like the original copies, the original writing. Like even though you start to change and you get different perspectives, that was a snapshot of your personality and your life at that time period. And I think that's an important thing to remember as we move forward as authors. That's definitely an important thing. So, why did you choose Dito Beam Publishing as your publisher?
Also a good question. I was in King, our big city of King. King's very small, but and you were there, and a couple of the authors were there, and you had your books laid out, and I looked at the books, and they were of a good quality, and I talked with you and a couple of the others, and learned that you were local, and that's a big positive in my feelings. And so after we spoke a few times, I felt like that you would be a good market for you would be a good, do a good service to publish my book. And I think the product is good. I'm satisfied with it.
Well, thank you. Will readers be able to look forward to more titles?
I do not know. After you start a book, after you finish it, and then there is that problem of marketing. Marketing is my big bugaboo. I enjoy episodes like this, which the blog that we're doing, I don't do enough of them. But getting out there and trying to get the book circulated is one of my biggest problems. I've got it in some local outlets, but as I said, you write for the satisfaction of writing. I think I do that more than the possibility of having more people read it. I wish I had more readers out there. I welcome more readers, but that's something in the future. Right now, I'm working on some short stories. I enjoy getting a short story done. That is a different art from doing a novel. Trying to compact a thought or a little bit of humor into 3,000 words or so is a little different than doing 50,000 words. But I've enjoyed working with that a little bit recently. And I don't have plans for another novel presently, though who knows, that may happen in the future.
Well, thank you so much for sharing today. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with your readers?
Well, I would like to say that in the book, it was finished probably 2 years ago or more, but in the times we live in, having about a third of the book dealing with an enslaved child, I thought would be a little bit of a ticklish subject. Some people get a little squeamish talking about slavery. Some people would like to think that it never existed. So I reread several times that section, that 90 pages or so, having to deal with the little slave boy, tried to think to myself and other people who had also read it, that section, is this going to be a problem with people? Is this going to be something that people will be critical of? And I'm sure there may be some that are, but universally the idea was no, they thought it was not something that people would be overly critical of, and that it was had a normal place. And so I've read it several times, and people have read it. They do not feel that that is a problem. Though we have to be sensitive to that in this day and age. Should be sensitive to it all along, but even more sensitive to it now. But he is the little boy who's named Sammy to start with, and then later on he changed his name to Johnny, is an integral part of the story. He is the, quote, boy in the treetops, end of quote. And so he is there on the first page of the story. He's there very much in spirit on the last page of the story. So I think that part turned out very well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think that readers that enjoy historical fiction will really enjoy this book, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much.